So the Memorial Garden is a place that we quickly traverse as we're going in and out of church or if we're running on errands in the neighborhood. But anybody who's lingered there and admired the dogwood in the spring or the flowers find it as a place of serene contemplation. And for those who've placed ashes of their loved ones in the columbarium, it's hallowed ground. And for parishioners, it's an eternal resting place in the most one of the most beautiful spots of their spiritual home. Niches that hold up to 4 urns can be reserved for a fee of $2,000, and this helps cover the current and future maintenance of the Memorial Garden. There are 167 niches in the columbarium, but the number of unreserved niches has dwindled. Right now, there are 16 unreserved niches. It's tough to predict when the garden will run out of niches. Well, I became the chairman of the Memorial Garden just about almost 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago, Thanksgiving. And at the time, as soon as I took over, I noticed that over the previous 5 years, subscriptions to an average of about 3 niches a year had been sold over the previous 5 years when Catherine Suarez was the custodian of the Memorial Garden. So I thought, oh my gosh, in 5 years we're going to be done. So I went to the vestry and mentioned this, and I'm beginning to feel like the boy who cried wolf because it's slowed down considerably. In the time that I've been chairman, I've sold four niche reservations, but still, the vestry is going to have to make a decision about this, and it's probably best that we got started, that we're not doing this with a gun to our head. We can make a deliberate decision about just how many niches we need. And so an important factor in making this decision about how and what to do will be getting input from the parishioners as to what their interest is in securing a niche. And we've also studied the committee that was formed by the property committee to study the expansion, looked at burial of remains in the ground in a designated area of the garden. So we'll get into that a little later. But first, a little history of the Memorial Garden. In 1984, a committee was formed to study constructing a columbarium, and the vestry retained a husband and wife team of architects who were parishioners to design the project. And it was projected to cost $340,000. And a fundraising campaign began a year later, actually 2 years later, and a contribution of $1,000 or more entitled the donor to a niche reservation. Construction began in late 1986, and it was dedicated in 1988, in September of 1988, by Dwayne Alford, who was then the rector. Sometime after that, the vestry approved a plan to construct the fountain, which was dedicated in 1992 to the memory of Bishop William Creighton, who had been a rector here from 1946 to, I believe, 1958, before he went to the cathedral and later became the Bishop of Washington. So, as I said before, once the vestry was cognizant of the fact that we are close to capacity, the property committee began this study late in the winter of 2023 and created the Memorial Garden and Columbarium Expansion Subcommittee, of which I'm a member, along with Suzanne Welch, Tim Dobbin, Denise Galbo, Rick Seal, and Chris Martin. And we visited the St. Albans All Souls Garden in the Garth, and looked at the St. Albans Parish columbarium as well, at the cathedral and the parish. And I also went over to the St. Albans School, has a columbarium, a small one as well, where the urns are buried in the ground beneath stones. And I've talked to some other parishes about their experiences with operating their columbarium. So we were tasked with basically coming up with some options, and we consulted with W.S. Tigler Monument Company in Baltimore. They do the engraving for the niche stones, so we have regular contact with them, and they fabricate monuments. And we asked them to give us some designs on maybe Henry, you can show them the. They proposed that we put two 30-unit niches, 30 niche units in the garden opposite the columbarium. And this is sort of the dimensions of it. And the niches would be designed to hold 4 urns. They might not be quite the size of the urns that we have now, but it would deliver the same result. These would cost about a little bit under $30,300 a piece, plus the foundation work that would be needed to install them in the garden. They also proposed a smaller 18 niche unit that would cost just under $22,000 plus the foundation work. And so the cost of the columbarium expansion would really be dependent upon how much we're going to expand, and that would be to a large degree determined by the interest in people securing a niche in the future. And that's a hard question to ask people, because people don't like to confront it. Like they don't like to confront a lot of planning decisions, but this one's particularly fraught. But also it's just hard to really know what your plans are. And so we came up with an estimate. If we were to build all 78 niches, this would cost about $82,000 based on what Tigler told us. And then we added some money to cover the foundation work and the preparation for the garden, and came up with a very, very rough estimate of just over $91,000. And the idea would be that we would, the option would be, and this is strictly a concept, no one has decided that this is favored or disfavored, but it's just something we presented to the vestry, that we could finance this by borrowing from the Norwood Parish Fund and paying it back over time with the proceeds of subscription sales. And this would be somewhat akin to the way the columbarium construction was partially financed back in the 80s. And there would be an incremental increase in the subscription every year up to about $3,500. So we end up about $3,500 for a subscription in the 10th year. And this would hopefully defray the cost of it. So of course, because of this financing arrangement, it would be very dependent upon parish interest, and we don't want to build more than we need. I think if I can't speak for the vestry, but that would be certainly how I would look at it if I were a decision maker. The report, which I hope some of you have had a chance to read, it was attached to the Crossroads article, also outlines a burial area in the garden, which would accommodate, we think, 20 to 30 burial places. And it's somewhat modeled after the Cathedral All Souls Garden. They use apparently a wooden lattice that they placed every time they bury some ashes, and it goes in the same spot, so they know where individual plots are. They're not marked because it's just a green lawn, but they can tell from using this lattice. And the ashes in the cathedral garden are placed in a biodegradable receptacle, and the names are placed on a plaque that's quite elaborate at the cathedral, but we wouldn't need to replicate that if we were to do that. So the timeline basically is that the vestry received the report in June, and are now is going to consider next steps. So we're trying to get some sense of what people are thinking about it. And I'd like to take some questions and maybe have a short discussion, and then we'll have a show of hands and to see whether are you interested in securing a niche? Are you, and if you're interested in having the garden, your final resting place, whether you'd like a niche or you're interested in ash burial. And whatever you say, it's strictly a straw poll. You're not committing to anything, and you're free to change your mind at any time. But this is to try to begin the discussion so that the vestry can inform itself as to what the parish is thinking about this before making any decisions. So are there any questions based on what I've said or what you may have read? Yes, Nancy. Oh, please. Yes, thank you.
So I'm single. And you say that each of those holds 4.
Right.
Is there any thought of having some that are singles? You know, or smaller?
The-
I mean, you know, it just seems to me that
You can purchase a part of a niche
but you
on
would
a
still
pro
be-
rata
You'd
basis.
be with somebody else. So,
But yeah, you could,
Yeah.
and you can
And
perhaps you could decide to go in with a group of 2 or 3 other people. Maybe not, you wouldn't necessarily need all 4 as long as you
I
didn't.
was just wondering whether there's ability to get some niches that are singles at a different rate.
Maybe you can answer the question better than I can, but
There are plenty of people who have single niches. They just have only one, what's it called? Urn in there. And that's their, is this on? 1, 2. Yeah. So it's not cost prohibitive. It's actually a really modest cost. You would just be in there by yourself. It's not as big as you think they are. They're really small, and it's like a really tight fit. There are few out there that have actually 4 in there. And so that's just the way we get around to it. You just have a little bit more moving room.
yes. Cindy.
Sorry, I came in late and I haven't read the report yet, so I'm coming in with ignorance. Did I hear you say there's room just for 20 ashes, 20 people's ashes?
20 to 30 in the area that we've designated as possible use for that.
And would there be other, my mother's ashes are buried in Raleigh at my sister's church. Would there be possible other areas?
I think over time we might identify other parts of the garden. That's the area that we didn't study it in great detail, but that's what we came up with at the time. Yeah. 167 was the number. Sarah's question was how many niches did we start off with, and there were 167 that were built when the right, exactly. So 70 or 80 niches would add another maybe 15 or 20 years to capacity. In the columbarium? Well, in the columbarium, it's on the wall, or it's those, we call them bench niches. They're horizontal, and they're built, the niches are built into the, it's a wall, it's a low wall that people can sit on it. Yeah, it's this like this when it's in front of. Okay, so this is the artist rendering of. I asked Kegler to give us some sort of artist rendering of what they would look like. This isn't exactly the look because there are actually 24 instead of 30 in each of those units, but that's what they gave me this week.
Are you committed to expanding the garden before you get count from the parish of whether there's interest in other people buying niche? I mean,
The-
is this a decision that's been made that you're going to expand no matter what?
No, I yeah.
Okay.
Sound to the computer.
Oh.
So let me turn it up for the room as well. Sorry.
Okay, I'm just wondering, how committed is the vestry to expanding the garden or?
I can't really speak for the vestry. That's above my pay grade.
No,
But-
okay, so is the assumption that the garden will be expanded? Is that the starting assumption? Or that the number of niches?
I
will
think
be
that, I think
expanded?
there's a general belief that we need to do something to expand the capacity.
Even though you've got spaces available after, what, 40 years of,
Even though we have some spaces left.
yeah.
But I would say, from my own personal perspective, what I'm committed to is soliciting the views of the parish so that we don't build what we don't need.
Yeah, well, that's really ugly.
It's not a good sales tool, if that's what if that's what you're saying.
There's a question from Zoom. Can you explain more about how the garden is different and considered a more eco-friendly option?
How the garden is different.
I think the in-ground versus the columbarium.
Well, I think that the idea of an in-ground burial is that it might be ultimately more space efficient in terms of if we could identify other areas of the garden where this could be done as well, it could accommodate more people, the ashes of more people, without building a lot of bricks and mortar. I think that's, and there is a view among some people that it's more eco-friendly. Ironically, ashes are quite toxic, and I've talked to a parish out in Potomac that they found that burying ashes in their garden wasn't good for the flowers and the shrubs. They did find there is a product that you can get that you mix it with the ashes and it neutralizes the toxicity. The cathedral uses it, and they do that as well. This parish, St. James, it's up on Tuckerman Lane. They actually scatter the ashes now. They no longer bury them, and that seems to be the favorite option of that parish at this point. It's a much smaller church than ours, so that's how it would be different. But to answer to your point, Elaine, adding more niches would change the character of the garden, even if we could find a more aesthetically attractive alternative than that.
Suzanne has a question on Zoom.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Can you hear me? Jim?
Let's see if the TV's muted or not. Just like that. Hold on a second, Suzanne. One
Yes.
second. Oh, there you
Go ahead.
Thanks. Oh, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, Jim, I want to thank you for your care and keeping of the memorial garden and bringing this idea of St. John's continuing to provide a spiritual home in the future. And so I'd like to actually for people to think about what happens if we don't. What will happen when and if we do run out of niches and we don't decide to plan proactively. We don't have to do it this year, but to start thinking proactively. I've served as an usher for over 20 years at memorial services, and I can see the importance to family members of being able to provide this spiritual home to their loved ones, to be able to, after a memorial service or before a memorial service, go out there and have the intimate service of an internment. And this is a serious thing to consider, but you're absolutely right. We need to see, is there parish interest? And that is hard when people don't like to think about end of life decisions. So I commend you for bringing this before us And welcome other parishioners to share their thoughts so that the subcommittee can consider the next steps for this and recommendations to the vestry. And I also am interested in seeing what a show of hands will be at the end of this discussion. Thank you.
Yes, please.
I don't know why this didn't occur to me earlier, but when you walk into the chapel, like you walk in from the parking lot into the chapel, there is a wall right here, right? On your left that you walk by, that
Correct.
brick wall. Would there be consideration ever of actually removing that brick wall and making the columbarium flush with where the wall is right now, so it wouldn't protrude?
So the face would be what the wall
The
is.
face would be the wall, and that way you have the exact same kind of like dimensions of the garden, but nothing's protruding or out of the way. I don't know why I didn't think about that earlier. I don't know what the answer is to that.
I think that's definitely something that would be worth looking at. I mean, very, very worth looking at, because it would not immediately change the character of the garden. But it's not something we looked at, so we'd have, before I could even offer a curbside view of it, we'd have to go out and look at it. But I think Suzanne's point is well taken, in that if we do nothing, then at some point in the future, parishioners will be shut out of the ability to secure a niche, and then their only option would be burial of ashes in the ground, which I think is a fine option, but may not be one that everybody is comfortable with. So I think we definitely have to confront this question. And fortunately, we do have some time. So I guess I'm looking for your thoughts on this in terms of the questions. And people on Zoom can enter their comments or responses to these questions. How many of you have thought about placing the remains of loved ones or yourself when the time comes in the memorial garden itself? So, all right, yeah, some of you have done it already. Okay. But in terms of, okay, and then would you want your ashes placed in a niche, or would you prefer or accept alternatively burial in the ground? So let's start with niches.
The ground.
In the ground meaning, okay, Henry, can you flash the picture of where? Oh yeah, it's right here. This is the area that's in the ground part behind and it's actually.
But Jim, would there be a distinct place like for our kids to come and see this is where Sari and Tammy are, or is it like
There would be a plaque, which you wouldn't be able to identify the place in the ground where your remains are buried. But you would.
Where is the plaque?
Well, the plaque could be either on the wall, or we could mount it at an angle in front, or place another pediment there for it.
Be a lot cheaper to do this version.
It would be much more economical, I would think, yes. Oh, Ann, could you come up and
So, and you would envision people using biodegradable containers, right? When you,
possibly, yeah, I mean, that would be,
well, that's what they do at the
That's what they do
cathedral.
at the cathedral, yeah,
And I've been to services where that's done, and it's
right.
actually a very beautiful potential option, I
I
think.
think, yeah.
But I just wondered if you were contemplating the scattering or biodegradable.
I think that the idea that we had thought about was more modeled on the cathedral's model of using biodegradable receptacles. Karen,
Actually, I have a comment. So I'm one of the people that does have a reserved spot in the niche, but really looking at that rendering of what it would be like to add what looks like a bunch of, I don't know, lockers at the bus depot on the other side. Sorry. This option here is very nice looking. And it seems to me that since we still have some availability for the people who really prefer in the wall, that if it were me, I would be recommending to at least keep this as an option. One of the reasons that I reserved a niche was I didn't want to put my family through kind of what happened when, in my family, there's the burden of, I want my ashes scattered at Maui and, you know, we went through that with my dad. He wanted to be in the river, but he wanted the Ohio River and he died on near the Delaware. So anyway,
Yeah,
I think that this option of a garden with, for me, it would be biodegradable, goes in there and there's a plaque maybe on the wall there. And then people do know this is where the ashes are. Certainly it's more of a place than he's in the river, which is where
Right,
my dad
right.
is. So,
it
and
would
also
definitely be
I
a
just-
sacred space. I mean,
Right.
there would be, in names of everybody would be engraved there.
right. So even though I have now that one, who knows, I could be convinced to switch over. And
Right.
then my 4 spaces in the current wall could be made available for somebody else
Correct,
because I will not be using all 4. Thank you.
right. And for those that, who are watching on Zoom, Nancy Adams asked the question of whether, it was more of a rhetorical question, I guess, that whether the burial in the ground would be less expensive than building niches, and the answer certainly is yes. Apologies for not connecting her to the microphone. Any other questions? Oh, yes, Rick.
I don't know if this is more a question or clarification because I'm part of the subcommittee and Jim and I were talking about this recently, but I've heard several questions about whether the burial would be how the in-ground would work. And I had asked the question recently. So to clarify, the response I got was, and to clarify this, there's no specific absolute plan. The question to just, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, Jim, is to explore interest in expansion. So what I would encourage all of you is to keep in mind that nothing is final. Plans for the specific niches are not final. This is a concept to present. The second thing on the in-ground was there's in-ground burial. So there's inurnment in an urn, or there's biodegradable. That hasn't been finalized either, to the best of my knowledge, right, Jim? But what we explored and saw at the cathedral was the concept of a biodegradable option, which is a little bit newer, but it does lay out with grids. They know who is where for a specific amount of time, and then there's a specific pattern of when those specific grids can be reused. So think truly biodegradable, if that goes forward. But what they do at the cathedral, which they have tons of money, for the plaque, they have this beautiful wall, and then there are these brass or metal strips that are laid out. It's hard to describe, but they're really nice. And there is a way to memorialize the name, but you don't go and specifically say my mother, my father, my relative is buried exactly there. They were buried in this memorial garden, and there is a permanent memorialization of that. So those are just the things I wanted to kind of point out. So I would just strongly encourage you not to get too caught up in the bus locker concept, but it's great to hear the feedback on it. Okay, so expansion can happen, and if you don't like this, maybe we can explore some other options like Sari brought up.
So niche burial, niche versus burial. What about burial? How many people are potentially interested in ashes in the ground, one way or the other?
The options either or.
Not in the wall, but in the ground.
Yes, right. Those are the two options, basically. In the ground, I'm not asking for the the various options that. The option is. I think we would, I'm asking, I guess, about biodegradable at this point. I think that seems more practicable, given the space concerns that we have. Biodegradable would probably afford more space, more burials than if we were to put ashes, urns in the ground.
Jim, could you ask the question, who could go both ways?
Oh, I see. Okay. Who would be amenable to either option? Ground or wall, right?
Two options for the ground, right?
No, the ground, I think we have, quite honestly, we have not fleshed out what type of in-ground burial would be proposed. But just for the sake of this discussion, assume it would be modeled after the cathedral with biodegradable receptacles. So that's the option.
One thing though, please, you're asking about people who are interested in going, who don't have something now, as I understand your question. And I think the people who do have something now might have a preference about the expansion. So could you phrase your questions in maybe two different ways? For instance, I think I should be able to help decide what kind of expansion takes place in the memorial ground, even though Jeremy and I already have a niche. It's of interest to us to know what that space is going to look like.
Certainly.
So
But I don't understand how the question would be different.
Well, because it seemed like you were asking people to show interest in whether they would want something for themselves, as opposed to whether they would approve a particular type of expansion. I mean, I think there's a distinction in the two groups, that's all.
Right. I'm not a pollster, so I'm trying to figure out how to accommodate this question. But who is in favor of expanding the capacity, the niche capacity of the Memorial Garden? Just ask that question preliminarily. I hope you guys are counting over there, because I'm not counting. Who's in favor of expanding the number of niches that we already have in the garden, in the wall, in whatever form? In whatever form, not bus lockers, but, nice looking niche units. Okay. All right. Okay. Who is in favor of creating a section of the garden where we would bury ashes? We have a political boss here in the front. You're counting these, right? This is not a vote, but okay. So then, among those who are in favor of expanding the niche capacity, how many of you would want to secure a niche in the future? But I'm looking for people who don't have niches who would be interested.
Jim, I think so.
Again.
It's just because you're asking for a concrete answer.
No, I'm not asking. Again, this is a straw poll. I'm just trying to get a sense of where people are on this, in the general sense. I'm not looking for commitments. There's no contracts to sign or anything like that. Yes. Yes. Okay. So are there any other questions or comments at this point?
Can I say something?
Yes.
Just say something that I think I heard the lady ask. Elaine, if I'm hearing you correct, you made the decision about the Memorial Garden because the aesthetic of the space, the way it is right now, is a place that you would like to be a part of. Like that aesthetic matters. I understand that, but what your question is that if you walked into a place and the aesthetic changed dramatically and you're like, I'm not really sure I want to be there, that's where you're saying that because you already have a niche reserved, you think that those who have a niche reserved should have like a say in, because they made their decision based on the place looking like this. Thank you. I think I hear that, and I appreciate that question, so,
Yeah.
thank you. But I also, one of the questions that I would have asked differently, does anyone opposed to an expansion, which means we run out of spaces and we tell people we don't have any more spaces? Does anyone opposed?
And we don't know when, but it could be as soon as 5 years, maybe 10 years.
I don't think anyone in good conscience is going to say we think there should be a limit and no one else should be buried at St. John's. So an expansion, but the expansion needs to take into consideration, it sounds like, how that affects the aesthetic of the place. So
Absolutely, I
yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Elaine is saying theoretically, we've been here a long time. We're going to run out of space, but we've only been burying people here since the 80s. And we know we are going to run out. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And I also have left some brochures these are the brochures that we distribute for people who might be interested in obtaining a niche and have any questions. And if you have any further follow-up questions about either the expansion or your own plans, don't hesitate to contact me through the office. They'll refer your email to me and we can talk either on the phone or by email or both. Thank you.